had an extraordinary conversation last night with a young woman called Casey and her mother. Casey was a fit young woman until she had a jab. Since then, she suffered some horrible, debilitating neurological symptoms. And what's worse is nobody seems to care and nobody knows what treatment to give her. It's really heartbreaking listening to Casey's story. You may have seen some of her posts and her friends and family's posts on Facebook. And I've been thinking about Casey overnight and what we can do, because we can't let this keep happening. We don't need more evidence. We don't need more vax injuries. What we need is action now. So what I'm proposing is Casey's Law. If someone suffers harm doing something that the government's required them to do for the public good, then they need to be given all possible support from the government to restore their lives and all their losses. So it's not fair that you do what you've been told to do and then all of a sudden you bear all the consequences and nobody is there to support you. It doesn't need to be like this. There's a lot of information about the risks from the jab and the alternatives to the jab. There's a lot of information about how to treat people that have suffered harm. The problem is the disconnect. The people are not being told this information. Instead, they're being told a lot of propaganda that it's safe and effective when we know it's not. Now, you may be feeling really vulnerable because your job has been threatened. You may be feeling vulnerable because you've had a jab and you don't want a second one, or because you've had 2 jabs and you're now being told that you need a booster. What you need to do is get information, get connections with like-minded people, find the right people. If you're getting advice from your doctor and they don't seem to be telling you what you need to know, find someone who can give you better advice. The nzdsos.com website has got a lot of good information. Voices for Freedom has got a lot of good information. I've posted up information on my Facebook page. There's lots and lots of international expert research from around the world that you can find. But what you need to do is get source data. Don't listen to the propaganda and spin. Listen to the real evidence of the doctors who are actually out there doing it, treating patients. The doctors whose COVID patients are recovering with the right nutritional and other health treatments. It's really, there's a huge divide. The divide between what the government's telling you and what the actual evidence is showing. So please get informed and get connected. The other thing that's happening is, as a result of our court case, the government put an exemption into the vaccination order under Clause 7A to allow people to get a medical or other exemption from a health practitioner. And that's a really, really good thing. Now what's happened is the Ministry of Health and various DHBs and the Medical Council and others have been telling people that that exemption is not yet available. Well, that is a lie. The exemption is in the law, it's there for people who need it, and it was put in there because the New Zealand Bill of Rights requires it. It was put in there by the government on the advice of the Ministry of Justice, and presumably because they could see the writing was on the wall for what they've done, that it doesn't require or doesn't meet the requirements of the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. We have our freedoms, we have a right to decline medical treatment, and we have a particular right to decline experimental medical treatment when we have a concern that it may harm us. So, if any medical practitioner gives you an exemption, that is all that is required under the current law. You need to give it to your employer, and they do not have any right to go behind that. They do not have any right to accept or reject it. They do not have any right to refer it on to the Minister of Health or the Ministry of Health or anybody else. It's between you and your health practitioner. If they give you a certificate based on your communication with them, that is an exemption for Clause 7A of the vaccinations order. Now, I'm writing to the government again because I'm really concerned that they are trying to superimpose their policies on top of our laws. And that is not okay. That is not their job. They cannot postpone the introduction of a law, and they cannot superimpose restrictions on top of a law that disadvantage the people who want to benefit from that law. The corrections staff, prison staff, face loss of their employment at the end of this week. They have no time to wait for the government to fluff around making up new rules. They are entitled to rely on the law as it stands today. There was an old case when Muldoon was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. It's a case called Fitzgerald and Muldoon, where a teacher took the Prime Minister to court because the Prime Minister was making up laws that weren't actually part of the law. And we're in much the same situation now. I made the submission in the recent High Court case that it's a case where Rosa Parks meets Fitzgerald and Muldoon. And that is exactly where we are with this current regime. Rosa Parks, for many of you will know, an amazing human rights activist who refused to get off the bus on her way home from work to give up her seat because she was a black woman. Well, what we have here is people who don't even have work to go home from. It's even worse than the Rosa Parks case. And the Muldoon part of it is because we have a government that has lost respect for the law. Think about that. The government's role is to uphold the rule of law and act in the public interest. Sadly, at the moment, they're not doing either. That's why I'm talking about Casey's law. If somebody suffers from harm from doing something that the government required them to do for the public good, they, at the very least, should be given all possible support from the government to restore their life and their loss. While we're talking about exemptions, there's a lot of health practitioners who are trying to help people get the exemptions that they need for the vaccination order, the no jab, no job law. And there are groups that are setting up to facilitate this because most of the doctors and health practitioners have been threatened by their bodies that if they do give exemptions, they will be fired or suspended or some way sanctioned. Now that is completely unacceptable, and a lot of good health practitioners have courageously stepped up to try and help members of the community who have got very valid reasons for wanting an exemption. There was an event in Palmerston North last night, which I was given information about, extremely concerning, setting up to educate people on exemptions and try and facilitate people meeting with health practitioners so that they could discuss whether they were entitled to an exemption. Sadly, that event was blocked, and it was blocked by a call from, we presume, someone in Wellington to the police in Palmerston North, who in turn called the venue hirer or the person involved in the venue, who cancelled the venue at last minute. Complete chaos, tears, disarray. People had been travelling for that meeting from quite distances away, only to find that the police and the venue occupier had cancelled that meeting. People are being intimidated by the police, whose job it is to act in the public interest. Now, the police should be our friends. They should be there trying to help us uphold the law, and they should look at all of the facts of the situation, not just jump to be the bunnies for the government. But in the meantime, we do have some risks there. Some of the police seem to be more politically motivated than acting in accordance to the law and upholding the public interest. So if you are contacted by the police when you're trying to do a public good act, it's really important that you have a plan. Don't necessarily talk to the police without first getting legal advice from somebody that understands the issues. You have no obligation to answer any of the police's questions. If they're questioning you, they have an obligation to tell you about your rights under the Bill of Rights Act. You don't have to answer. You can just invite them to send you some questions in writing that you will then consider how you can help them. You can ring a lawyer and get advice. There's a lot of things you can do, but don't be bullied or pressured into doing something that may not be helpful for you. We should be able to trust all of our systems and authorities, but something's gone really badly wrong in the times of COVID, and some of the protections that we used to be able to assume that we had are no longer as reliable as they used to be. It's flushing out a lot of big, serious problems. So you need to look after yourself. You need to get yourself surrounded by a good, sound network of like-minded people, but people that understand the issues, the law, and the science. And then take your time, hold your space, take a brave step forward to do what you need to do, but make sure you've got your back covered.